some weird graphical stuff when I was riding around with the unicorn. But other than that, it was pretty good.
Did you guys get it for free?
No, unfortunately.
Yeah. Did you hear about that?
No.
So you know the Notre Dame fire?
Oh, yeah.
Right, yeah.
So Ubisoft gave Odyssey away for free for like 2 weeks. Or, no, it was Unity, I think is what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're, aren't they helping, like, save Notre Dame, basically?
Yeah, they're giving, like, I think they said they were pledging, like, $1 million or something, which I think it was Giant Bombcast that I was listening to.
That was after everyone's like, okay, why do you make this free? Then they're like, oh, we're doing this.
Yeah. Well, because there was, when they were making Unity, I think, like, they put a ton of time and research into, like, they knew Notre Dame inside and out, and there was a lot of people that say, never been to Notre Dame, but they play the game and they can, so.
It's something like they send their art team or like the heads of the art department there for like 3 months.
Yep.
Just to like day after day just stare at a building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, capture a lot of stuff. Because I mean that was the thing is the Assassin's Creed series was always heavily, deeply grounded in history. So.
Oh yeah.
So that was a good thing, but cool.
That was hard to watch.
Let's see.
The what now, sorry?
I got Twitch affiliate, so that means people can subscribe to me.
Oh, nice. When are you getting the jacket?
It's I have to get the jackets on.
I know.
All right.
Maybe an animation mentors shirt. Because that's what we were talking to during class, and I was one of the 3 people who answered correctly.
No question challenge yet. All right, cool. So we can probably go ahead and get started then. So this will be good. Obviously, thanks everybody for braving the weather. Made it.
Nice weather.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Sweet. Well, we'll get started then. So I know you guys are new. You guys have been here before. So this is today we're going to cover is part 3 of the whole product configurator. Which what we should be covering today is the initial camera setup. So that's the free cam using touch controls. I'll kind of stay at that high level one because I can kind of get deep in blueprints and stuff. But hopefully that'll at least spark enough ideas for you guys to understand how that was set up. And then we'll go through the actual UI setup, and then I'll show you some of the integrations with when you press a button, how do you get it to actually provide a function. So we'll do that. Challenge question for today. This would be a good one. So console versus PC, what does the future look like for game development? So this is kind of an open question, but I'll start. I will tell you that my professional opinion is that consoles are going away. Or at least the traditional model of a console is going away, and PCs are the future. So, any rebuttal? Anybody think I'm stupid?
I have no idea because things have changed recently within the console PC market. So
how so? Elaborate.
Stadia.
Can you press close?
In particular.
Up there. See the button close.
Depending
press
on how
it.
that goes will really depend on what happens. Also, I feel like consoles can't fully go away because they're cheaper. It's just easier for people to buy a console over build a computer or buy an expensive computer.
I think there will always be a need for them, whether or not they resemble what we have today. I think, is it Microsoft that's going with that, like a disc-less one right now?
Also handhelds like the Switch and like 3DS, that thing's basically dead now. But
which those are very unique platforms, yeah.
Right. Those will always exist, so because gaming on the go is a huge market outside of mobile. So.
I say in Japan and Asia, it's huge.
Yeah,
it's
and
dominant.
It's even popular over here with people with large commute times. So.
Yeah.
Also, like, it's great when you can just like spend $300 and give it to a kid and know that pretty much whatever they do with it, they'll have to really try hard to break it, compared to like a computer where they could just basically destroy like $2,000 worth of equipment.
What about like what is it, the Corsair? Corsair made one that looks like basically like the Mac Mini trash can, but it's a full stack, like super compact. That still counts as a PC, although it functions more like a console.
I think just like the main thing like you're talking about really is that like the lines between like the specs between a PC and a console are getting more and more blurred, and the technology is just getting like we can fit. You know, like I have a laptop right here that's like barely bigger than this, and I can fit a 1070 in it. You know, it's just like all of the really high quality, you know, hardware is like not such a big deal. It's getting cheaper and smaller and easier to just fit into a little package that, you know, you can put on the market for $450, $500. And so it's like, you know, essentially a console. When we first came out, like Xbox, they're just like, well, we want like a PC that can just play games, and it's just like tailored for just that purpose. But it's not really essentially any different than a PC. So it's kind of just gonna kind of merge, or like slowly, like, you know, consoles are gonna get better and better and better, and PCs are just getting cheaper and cheaper as far as like quality. So.
Interesting.
Beluga Studios says there will always be consoles, just the traditional architecture will be more aligned with PC than the way they were making consoles, which were closed hardware that wasn't upgradable.
If you could upgrade your consoles, that'd be pretty cool.
That's always been so. From a development standpoint, the life cycle for consoles has always been 10 years. You know, like that's always been the target for Sony and for Microsoft. Which, if you think about it in terms of PC development now, you know, 10 years is huge. Think about if you had a computer from 10 years ago, right?
I got a couple. I got a whole basement full.
You know.
That's also why we're seeing the mid-generation upgrade. It's still the same console, just a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of like they took the Apple route with slightly better processor, you know, still the same number of cores, just faster gigahertz. Yeah.
You know, the thing, so I spent a lot of time doing stuff for Hewlett Packard's consumer division over the years. And, you know, get back to what you were saying, it's this distinction between, is this thing a computer or is it an appliance?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's an appliance, then there's a certain set of functionality that it's got, and it's got enough hardware to support that through enough rounds of where that software is going that it's tolerable. And the thing is that you don't have to think about it, you just turn it on and it goes.
Yeah.
As opposed to with a PC, there's always maintenance. There's always operating system maintenance issues. And you know, I gotta say, for, you know, my experience with my kids, it's been nice to not have to do a whole lot of operating system maintenance on those.
That's always been my favorite part about consoles, is that that's what it's there for.
Yeah.
You know.
You don't have to worry about like, it not working. You
Mhm.
have to fix it.
It'll
Yeah.
tell you when it's not working, and it will fix it immediately.
Well, I think
Ring
the
of death, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's
60 to 90 days.
yeah. I think though too that from a development standpoint, it sucks building for consoles. It really does. But from a consumer standpoint, you know, it's nice because, you know, you've got to standardize.
Yeah.
You know, your
Also-
game's going to run the exact same as somebody else's.
Yeah.
You know.
Also, the controller kind of puts a standard how from game to game how to play.
Mhm. But couldn't it be said because you could use a wireless controller with a PC?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind
But
of
that means the
same
console
deal
would
as
have
all
to
the
use
Mhm.
controller.
I think what'll be interesting is because what you would hit on too with the Stadia thing. I can't remember if I said it. Did any of you guys try OnLive when it came out? That's like
I
8
didn't.
years ago.
I think it's I didn't know.
It was the precursor to Stadia.
No, I
It was
didn't.
online streaming, cloud-based.
I didn't.
I absolutely hated it. I hated it because there was about a half-second delay, which for first-person shooters, nope,
Yeah, no.
nope.
I don't think it would work for first-person shooters, but for any like RPGs or things like that, it would work well with. So
Yeah.
it's dependent on the type of game.
So Stadia will be interesting,
But they also have infrastructure, so we'll see.
It's also dependent on your internet connection.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
People
there's
more rural
variables. Yeah.
will not be able to use it, but the console
Yeah.
lets that thing go.
Yeah.
Except for the 50, meg first day patch.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see, especially with the announcement of the quote PS5 or whatever they want to code name it. Xbox is, I will say this though, Xbox is making the huge shift. I forget what they called the model, but it was the Xbox. Oh, what is it? It's basically their game service. They're shifting that route
yeah.
too. So they're shifting to.
like Steam.
When we were walking back.
No,
from
it's not. It's not Steam, but how they're going
It's
diskless.
like
But they'll actually
Game Pass.
content delivery.
Game Pass, right?
So
Right.
I think that my hunch is that they're actually developing the same streaming technology. So you'd have Stadia and then Xbox
I'm
Pass.
almost certain that's what it is, because when we were leaving the Stadia thing, 2 Xbox developers were running away saying we need to talk. So yeah.
So it'll be interesting. I think over the next couple of years, especially when consoles are announced, be really curious to see what happens. My bets are on PCs, and then like micro form factor PCs that resemble consoles, but have like built-in Stadia optimizations.
Also, I think online can't go full online with a console because there's just the same reason you can't support it everywhere.
See, that's interesting, because I would say that most of the titles developed in the past 5-6 years have made a huge shift from, co-op couch to some kind of online account based.
But I mean, even that's like you have to have it not be online, because sometimes people don't have a desk.
Right.
So they need to be able to access their console without the best internet.
Cool. Okay. Good
So
topic.
just one quick follow-up question on that. So, I mean, as the discussion went on, the other thing it reminded me of is all the time spent basically, developing on a computer for some other kind of environment, and then it's like, okay, what's the fidelity level of the emulator that you can get to support doing that kind of stuff? And it never occurred to me, I guess, when it comes to developing games for PlayStation, for things like that, do they do that development work with an emulator, or do they just port the running application straight over?
No, you have to for consoles like Switch, PlayStation, Xbox. You have to have an actual dedicated build, and the reason for that is you have to pass validations, you have to pass patching. I know this because I have all 3 dev consoles. There are very specific requirements for each one. In fact, like if you go to develop PlayStation, there's a laundry list, and it takes about 30 days minimum to get through validating it and making sure your game works for it. Yeah. So there's no emulators, but definitely from a development standpoint, PC is way easier to develop for. Much more forgiving. So. Cool. Okay, just a couple announcements then rolling on. I'll put those up there too. I know you guys have seen it. You can take a screenshot or a picture or stuff. But those are just some of the resources that Epic provides. Also some community resources. If you guys have questions about Unreal, if you have any questions about how to do stuff, which I guess backing up to, I always forget because most of you guys are familiar. Introduction. So I'm Ryan Manning, head of Bad Rhino Games, game studio here in Kansas City. We're primarily an Unreal developer. I am in Studio collectively. We're kind of the official arm of Epic's Meetup for Kansas City. So we are officially sponsored by them, not monetarily, but just they help to give us resources and tools and stuff to provide this to you. So that's kind of what we're here for. And then the second thing too is that we do live stream this. So of course we love having you guys show up in person. It's much easier to kind of do some face-to-face discussions. But for whatever reason, if there's you're sick or something you want to catch in, we do live stream it, which we've got about 6 people watching now. So you guys can ask questions and stuff. Brooke over here, she's actually a part of the studio too. She's kind of monitoring that for questions and stuff, and do that. So, and then of course we will record these as well. So if you guys want to follow up on YouTube later, absolutely can. Like I said, I know in this, over the next, I think it's 2 more months after this, but a 6-part series of doing this product configurator. There's probably some things you guys want to go back to, or if you have questions. Another point too is that we do have a Discord. I'll put it up at the end there. That's a resource for you guys. So if you have questions as you're working through projects, use it. There's people that are here. There's also other people that aren't here that are a part of that group. So if you guys have questions and stuff, do that. Okay, and then 2 other things. I say they're quote events, but the GDC videos have been going up, a lot of them from Epic's talks and things that they gave. So there's a lot of good resources in there. Even as a developer who's been doing this for 14 years, 15 years, I still find some awesome nuggets of tidbits in there. So they've got really good videos, good training stuff. And then finally, I think this weekend starts off the Unreal Mega Jams, which is anybody participating in those? No? Okay, cool.
I might try.
It's absolutely worth it. I will tell you this, that if you guys have any hesitations or reservations about doing it, I'd say just put them aside. the community as a whole is awesome. I'm sure you're going to have some like rock stars that show up, but it's a huge event. I want to say that it is global, so you get all kinds of mixed things. And from a development experience standpoint, it's invaluable. You get that pressure, you get that crunch, and it's a huge developer. So it's up there. You can probably just search Unreal Mega Jams for more information, but that's the link there. So cool. And then one other kind of noteworthy announcement is, have you guys actually seen the Unreal Academy link? So underneath, it's if you go to the Epic website, the Unreal website, I guess technically, on one of the drop downs is Unreal Academy. And what that is I think I mentioned this last year too, or not last year, last month, that Epic is making a push to actually provide more full service training modules. What I mean by that is instead of just presenting a concept or an idea from something, they're actually making these projects from start to finish. So this is where they're posting most of those things, is this academy. So you can go in there and you'll see a series of videos, a series of things. You'll get project files and stuff like that. So definitely stay posted. I know that's definitely coming up soon. Cool. And then just finally, just kind of recapping what we've got for this year. So today we're actually going to be covering the camera setup, the integration, the UI setup, and then next month we'll do the cinematic sequence. That's kind of fun. So the in game, I'll play it here in a second so you guys can see. And then packaging, deploying, and then we've got a couple other fun things that we'll just cover throughout the rest of the year. I want to say too, in August we're actually going to have a guest speaker, a couple guest speakers actually from here locally that work with Unreal. They do a lot of kind of art viz, they do some cinematics, some prototyping, stuff like that. So we'll have them in here. And if you guys have any suggestions for other developers, or even if you guys yourself have things you'd want to talk about, catch me afterwards. We'll see about kind of having you just present some stuff. Would love to have that involvement. So cool. Okay. Without further ado, let's jump in. Okay, so how many of you, I know most of you guys are familiar with this project. Yes, yay, nay. Let me just show you real fast kind of what this is. I want to say that I think I actually broke this when I tried to optimize the level a little bit so we didn't have all the cameras and everything. But essentially what we have here is a small little menu. This is what we'll cover today. Small little animation that can play, various different cameras that go about. This one here I think is what I broke. But that's basically just a cinematic sequence. And then of course this is all built for touch, which I know I'm using my mouse. But we can use finger controls to pinch in and out, to zoom, and then of course free fly around. And then go through and just swap out the paint color scheme. So that was actually what we covered last month and the month before that. Okay, cool. So let's jump in then. So the first thing that I'm going to cover is the actual camera setup itself. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier too, there's probably some deeper topics in here as it dives into blueprints and stuff. If you guys have questions, try to save them. I'm not the super strongest in blueprints, but hopefully I'll be able to answer them. So let's go ahead and dive into that. So I'll open up the level blueprint here real fast. Bless you. And I think it's in here, yeah. So you guys probably recognize this from last month. This is where we put in, where we're getting all our actors from the level, both the animated version and the static one. And also what we've done here is we've broken off part of the sequence to set the player cam to this camera that we predefined. Now, I'll open this up, we'll go through the blueprint in here. But essentially what this little snippet of code is saying is when we begin play, one of the things that we'll sequence through is getting the player controller, and then we're setting the camera to this player cam. And that's what this guy does. We have no blending, so there's no fading, it's just instantaneous when it starts. And then the rest of the stuff we'll go through a little bit later, but this is setting the camera position. So to start with, really all we're doing is we're just overriding the default camera with this preset player cam based off of just, again, one of our sequences is to happen next. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up. Now the player cam itself is just a blueprint that we've dropped into the level. Like I said, we'll cover this again. I know I broke some things, but we'll explain what's happening here. But This player cam, if you notice, it's slightly different than these others. So if I select just one of these default cameras, which I want to say is just a default camera, yeah, right here, just camera. So it's not a cine camera. That's what these default ones are. I'll come back to this, but if you notice when I select my player cam, we kind of have that little red line. That's called a spring arm. And really what that does is at the end of that spring arm, kind of where our locator's at, that is our center point. So that's where it's actually going to pivot around. So if you guys notice when we do the touch controls, how it kind of pivots around that center point, that's the spring arm. So let's go ahead and just actually just open up the blueprint itself and we'll kind of dive in here. Okay. So it's broken up into a few parts. That's actually a little difficult to see. But what we'll do is we'll actually just kind of start with, I want to say it's, we'll actually just go with the kind of touch controls. So like I said too, I know a lot of this is probably some deep stuff. Now granted, if you know blueprints, it's probably not that deep. But in terms of setup, just kind of explaining a little bit here what's happening. So some of these functions that you see here, so for example like this touch rotation, that is a custom event. And so that means that's something that we've created to access somewhere, whether it's in the blueprint or access within the level, to be able to kind of broadcast, hey, this is happening. This one, even though it's red, this is an actual function that's a part of the actual graph itself. So this is the input touch. We've got a press and we've got a release. So if we follow the pressed, you notice there's a slight duration delay that we've added here. That's simply just to make sure that if you're tapping, it's not snapping the screen. So you touch and then it takes your controls. And then we've got a branch condition, which is simply stating, hey, are we touching or are we not? I will say this, you can probably ignore these. I was a little messy, left some other code in there. I'm not actually doing a focused item. Really what that was designed for, or the initial thought process behind that, was you could tap an item and the camera would actually move. So the spring arm, the camera would move, but you'll see later I actually disconnected that. The primary reason is I wanted to just have preset camera locations, and since we're spinning around a single model, it didn't make sense to have to shift focus. And so so then once it's branched, so if we are touching, then it's going to set the location, and then we're actually going to get the actor rotation, which should be the target camera, and we'll start setting it, and then go through an event. Like I said, I know I'm covering this pretty high level. I will grab some screenshots of this so you guys can have those and dissect it later. But essentially what it's going through here is breaking out the camera difference. So rolling of your cameras as your camera's facing forward is going to be this. Your pitch is going to be up and down. And then your yaw, I think, should be this side to side. So if you notice that when we break out the actual camera itself, we're not using roll, because what we don't want is the camera, it kind of makes you seasick. So that's the only reason why we've broken out just the pitch and yaw, so just the Y direction and just the Z direction. And then from that, we're pretty much just on tick, just finding out as we're moving, it's just kind of following that location. And then finally what it does is it processes everything through and then sets the actual camera position. So again, all makes great sense in theory, but these are all no genie to make that work. So any questions on that? Cool. Yeah, actually I don't have chat up. What
It was talking about the background, if they wanted to change the background out of the product configurator, if they would require a different mapping. Do you have different questions?
Are they talking about the background on the which one?
The grid of the background of the product configurator, like when you actually show it.
Let me see real fast. You're talking this guy on the floor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, actually, I think we covered that last month. That's just a simple material. The whole environment itself is just a custom one. You can absolutely change out any of those. That's not a problem.
That's the substance tile, right? There.
Yeah. In fact, actually, most of all the materials that were in there were substance based. So. All right, cool. So moving on, I'll actually cover kind of the zoom in and out. So this one was just to put in for the actual mouse wheel itself, because the touch input is going to be both pinch zoom and rotation, so that's why we don't have it. But this is just put in there for simple debugging. So we've got mouse wheel up, mouse wheel down. Again, these aren't custom functions. These are something that's built into the engine. And then all we've simply done is set that spring arm. So again, if you remember that camera, the little red arm, because we've got that spring arm in there, it's just simply pushing the camera back. So it's not actually moving and translating the camera, like in the sense of it's not moving the whole assembly, it's just lengthening and shortening that spring arm. So that's very important, because if we were adjusting the whole camera and we were moving it out, that center point becomes offset. And so now you start rotating around something completely else in the world. And then finally, we just put some values in there just to help, so it's not so abrupt and it's not like zooming you in out really quickly. Cool. Okay. Well, I should make a note too. Again, I know I'm kind of briefing over blueprints, but if you notice this one, the spring arm one, this is actually calling a function from here. So I'm sorry, it's actually targeting this spring arm. So if I go to my viewport, there's our camera, and that's our spring arm. So in here, that's where we just simply targeted the spring arm, just like that. Makes sense. So you can drag and drop that in there. That's fine. Okay. And then, let's see, I think we've disabled this, but just showing the mouse cursor at the begin, so you've got the mouse cursor, you can interact. Again, that was put in there just so, which again is very, very simple. Get player controller, event begin play, show mouse cursor. And that was just so that way you could actually click on things, because if you didn't have this, mouse would disappear. Or we'd have to replace it with a custom cursor. Okay, this is some tick stuff. We'll skip that because you guys don't need that. Okay, so this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the actual camera function itself, which is the moving the camera around. So rotation speed here, this is just a custom variable that we set. And what that was designed to do is to be able to set it out as you're moving the camera. It's not translating one for one. So, if you move 1,000 pixels, it's not going to spin your camera really fast. So we're using the variable because we'll actually use that in multiple places. But essentially what we're doing is we're taking a mouse Y direction, mouse X direction, and we're basically just setting some rotational values and then targeting back on the camera its location. Any questions on that? Okay, cool. Awesome. Camera focus on object. Again, all of this code, if you notice, that did create a custom event, but it simply disconnected it. So that's why this code will not run, because it's not actually attached to anything. And then finally, there's the camera limitation, which again, this was a custom event that we set up. And really what we wanted to do was to try to prevent the camera from going too far up, because essentially what would happen, and we could spend a little bit more time making better code for this, but essentially once you get to the 180, the camera now becomes upside down. So we wanted to set some locations both vertically and lower so we wouldn't go through the floor and stuff like that. So to do that, we simply just created a couple variables, this Y limit min and Y limit max, and that's where we set the maximum and minimum angles. So all that makes sense? Okay, cool. So one question that you probably haven't asked but wondering is, like, why do we have all these variables inside of the blueprint when we're setting it all here? And the primary reason for that is inside of our level, when we place this blueprint, this player cam, you can see here that those variables become exposed. So we don't actually go back to the blueprint itself and set rotation speed, Y limit, max. This is great. It's I say these are the artist friendly, or these are the non-programmer friendly ways to set it up. So again, as we're testing, we're going through iterations. This is a really good production practice, because at any point, who's ever doing your validation, whether it's like an art director, a TD, a project manager, they have those abilities to go in and kind of tweak them themselves and say, hey, these are good, and be like, cool, that's awesome. I should make a note here too. Part of what you do with some of these variables, so if I go to the Y limit min, if you notice that was one of those parameters we could change. When you add those variables in there, you have the ability to change instance editable, and then you also have, if you notice the little icon here that says that it is visible in public. And the reason for that is if you don't have those in there, so you could drag this camera into this level and have totally separate parameters and throw it into another level and be able to change different parameters as well. So that's your beauty of the instance editable. So, okay. Any questions on that stuff? Again, I know that's I'll post some screenshots later, and I'll link it. But that is essentially the camera setup that goes into there. Let me double check too. I want to say, yeah, we'll go. Okay, yeah. So we'll do this next real fast. Because it is part of the camera. But if you remember when we play through, we actually go through and we have the ability to swap these cameras. Now, if you notice at any point, I can take possession of that camera again. So what we're doing with this setup, and again, we'll come back to the UI and show how we click it. What we're doing here in the setup is actually telling that player cam to move to a certain position to set a certain spring arm length, as opposed to trying to toggle a totally separate camera. And the reason for that is we want a seamless interaction. So no matter where I spin that camera, I can go back to the position again. So that's just kind of a nicety. So let me go and exit out of that, and then show you guys. Let me open my level blueprint again and explain here.
So, question.
Yes.
Where you said you post screenshots and stuff. Where are you posting that to?
The internet's.
Online.
He doesn't even question where on the internet. No. What I'll do is I'll actually post it on all of our YouTube videos when we upload this afterwards. In the description, I'll actually put the Google link to the slides and everything, so you guys can have that. Yep. Okay, so with it, if you remember, our camera setup has the camera and a spring arm. So we've got two different components that we can target here. So if I come over to here. This is essentially what's happening. And again, I'll explain it, but what we're doing is a custom event. I'm just calling it Cam 1. So we've got Cam 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which they're all associated with those individual little buttons that we push. And then we've also got this bind event to Cam 1 dispatch. Now, I can't begin to explain necessarily why we had to do it this way, because thankfully I had somebody smarter than me who helped me with this. But in order for us to actually broadcast that a button's being pressed from the UI to trigger back to the camera, we had to create a custom, basically dispatch event that the camera itself was listening for, and then that the UI was broadcasting. So that's the way that we had to kind of get around being able to set up in the level blueprint the different camera positions, but still broadcast back to the camera itself. So to do that, so when we press that first button, this is essentially what happens. We get our spring arm component, so we're targeting that. Now, if you notice here, there's our player cam, so that's actually what's in the level itself. So from that guy, we're getting both the spring arm, we're getting its actual current location and its current rotation position. And then what we do is we actually come out. Now, in this case, we're setting the spring arm tangent. I'll explain this here in a second, what this all means. But we're setting the actual spring arm length. Then we're also going through when we're getting the camera's current position, its current rotation. And then what we're doing is we're actually going through what essentially is a timeline. And I don't think I actually did anything custom yet. So this is just a standard kind of S-curve. We're going through a timeline, and then we're setting both the rotation and the position for that camera. But if you notice here, we've got a time delay of 4 seconds. So every time we click the camera to change position, it will take exactly 4 seconds to get to the new position. Make sense? So very, very simple. It's just simply what this does is just saying, hey, where's the camera currently at, and where do I want to put it? Okay. So going back to the level real quick, I'll show you, I'll activate game mode here to explain. That is why you see these other blue cameras in there. Because what I essentially did with these is I set the different positions. So is that pretty clear for you guys in the lower right? You can kind of see it. I just decided on, hey, where do I want these cameras to give me kind of the coolest angle to highlight whether it's certain products or stuff like that. So rather than me guess values for going from to values, I simply just choose some of these cameras in there. That's really the only purpose for it. So, for example, if I take this guy, over in my details panel, this is where I get my location and my rotation information. And so if I go back to my level blueprint, you can see, so if I go to, I can't remember what position that is, but let's just say for argument's sake, it's camera 2 position. So again, getting our spring arm, getting our rotation and our location of the camera, and then simply setting there's our rotation, and there's our position. So just copying and pasting those values into there. And then this is where the beauty of this is. I'm processing everything through this same timeline, the same transition smooth is what we called it. So for cameras 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, all of them are going to use the exact same timeline. Oh, nice. So, for that, so if you notice this transition, how many of you guys are at least kind of familiar with animation curves and what they mean? Okay, a little bit. Okay. So if this were a linear curve, so from just straight point to point, what would happen is that camera would start animating and just immediately go, and it would keep that same velocity until it hit the endpoint and just abruptly stop. So by using this and this kind of timeline component, we have the ability to change all of our cameras. So for example, I'll show you real fast, and hopefully this won't break. But essentially what this curve is going to do is this camera is just going to rock it out of as soon as you press it, but it's going to go real smooth to get to its position. So I'll just compile it real quick, and we'll see what kind of beautiful nastiness we have here. So I'll play, and I'll select one of my cameras. So if you notice, it's real fast, which actually it's not as bad as I thought. It's kind of cool. But that's why we use that one timeline. So if I go back here, and we'll go back to our event graph. So this one timeline, again, we can process everything through it, is kind of our master controller. And again, we can set our time. So if you want it faster, take it to 2 seconds. If you want it slower, take it to 10 seconds, whatever you want. And then everything processes through the same thing, which is just simply set position, set rotation. Cool?
So, looking at this, there's one camera that's really, the player camera is really
correct.
The actual view. And then there's the transition controller, which is basically saying, okay, what do we do with the difference between the current position and the desired position?
Mm-hmm.
And each one of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are position indicators. So that's where does this need to resolve to?
Yep.
The question I've got is those target positions, those objective positions, are those positions coming out of the cameras that you added in there? Or did
Yes.
you have to actually...
Yes and no. So if you notice that I actually typed in the values here.
Okay, that's what I'm sure.
Like I was saying too, you could set it to dynamic, like you could set it where it's targeting something, but that would require you to then, because this isn't the level blueprint, you could target one of those other cameras. So I could get like camera 2's position, and then I could say get its rotation, get its location, and then you could actually process those as the input here.
So you can update it.
Yeah, now the advantage to that would be that that's kind of what I consider more designer artist friendly, because they're not having to touch anything with Blueprint. They're just saying, hey, ooh, I want to move this slightly closer. We'll go artsy fartsy. It's like, I need it to be closer. I need this to be more dynamic, and you can do it that way. But essentially, you're getting the same information is being processed. It's just get the current location of the camera, and I want you to go to here.
It's just the work that you have to do to get that information in there, as opposed to going back and dragging the camera around
Correct.
to a different spot.
Yeah, and again, the reason why we set that up, because this is that player cam, the reason why we wanted the one camera was because the nature of this product configurator, we wanted a seamless, you're in that area, you can zoom in and you can go around, and I want to see something that's predefined, but to explain kind of the design process behind it, the purpose was to make people fall in love with the product, right? Like, again, this is a bike, but let's say it's a custom bike shop and this bike's $6,000, versus, $40 Huffy, right? Like, you want there to be that rich experience. You want them to feel like they can get close, they can get intimate, they can go back, they can customize it. And so that's why we set this up with that free cam to still move, but still have some predefined, like, hey, we want to draw your attention to the camshaft, we want to draw your attention to the carbon fiber bottle holder. So by setting up this way, we have some predefined areas, but it still gives them the ability to interact, to touch it.
But the thing is that you could extend this same strategy out to as many actual view cameras as you wanted to. It's basically what you're saying is there's a camera, there's a set of constraints around what the limitations of the camera's movement are, there's a set of target locations that you want it to be in, and you can swap it around.
Yeah, so I can tell you this amount of code right here stays the same. In fact, actually, the reason why we're doing the custom dispatch events is for our buttons. So when we press 1, it goes to 1, 2, 3, and 4. But this is literally just duplicated. We just simply changed cam 3, and then we set its position. So it's a lot of the same nodes. That's why I'm saying it's not very complex. I made it, so it's definitely not going to be complex.
There's a question about timelines, but
Yeah.
specifically day and night cycle maintenance timelines.
That's a whole nother topic. Yeah, no, that's that's not necessarily a timeline that we're seeing here. That's really more of a custom blueprint that phases between different setups. There's a lot. In fact, actually, Epic did a live stream about 9-10 months ago, and they were discussing that about Fortnite. And there's a ton of parameters. And essentially what they're doing is they're a theoretical timeline of 24 hours, but at each tick they're blending between cloud opacity, lighting conditions, pre-baked stuff. So very, very different. Really what this node is, for the animation timeline, this is simply just a stating over an X period and over time, give me some kind of value. It's absolutely, I think agnostic is the term. It's not tied to any animation per se. It's simply just that, as you saw, as ours was taking 4 seconds or whatever it was, this is just simply how it tracks with that, if that makes sense. Lerps? Yeah, probably appropriate.
Large,
Cool.
use it for acceleration.
Yeah. Timelines are used in a lot of places. Blending things. Again, the pretty much what I can say, the reason why you use a timeline is because of this. Because you can set your blends. It's not point A to point B. It's point A to point B using this kind of curve. The other thing too is you can actually set your time. You can extend these out. You can make it faster, slower. You can even come in and add. I think you can add. There we go. Add a curve. So like you can. I'll just. This will be fun. So we'll see what this does. But I'll show you just the advantage with that. So if I move this off, play. So that's the advantages using your timeline. God, that is hideous. I'm sorry. I've subjected you guys to that. But yeah, that is the purpose of a timeline node, is purely just to give you interpolation values, alert values, and so on and so forth. Cool. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers our camera setup. Do you guys have any questions, or do you want me to unpack anything else here first before we'll move on to kind of the UI stuff? Yes?
No, I was just beatboxing sporadically.
Thinking out loud.
Do that.
Cool. Beatboxing Tourette's.
Yep, got that.
Cool. Any other questions on the camera setup? All pretty straightforward. Again, I know, like I said, I'll post a screenshot so you guys can see the nodes, but it is at its core relatively simple. There's not a lot of complex setup to it. I guess the only other note to mention in this one too is that because we've set this up in the actual level blueprint itself, you have to actually have the object in the level. So that's why we have this player cam, again, which is a blueprint. The other advantage, just kind of highlighting this too, is that because this is an actual blueprint and we've exposed some of these variables, we've made them instance editable. The cool part about this is that you've essentially set up all the logic of how this camera will work with touch controls, but you can have it function and feel differently in a totally separate level. So you can do it per each one. So you may find that, let's say that, for example, we've done a bike in this one, but let's say that we did a 747. Our controls are probably not going to be the same on the 747 because you're going to be you're basically going to be petting the screen to try to get it around. So that's one of the advantages of using a blueprint for that. Cool. Okay. Sweet. 6:45. Do you guys mind if we take like maybe a little 5-10 minute break real quick? Cool. Okay. And we'll come back, and then what we're going to do after this is actually show you kind of going through UI stuff. So this should be fun. So cool. We'll take a little break then real quick.
Yeah, these are not for... No. Yeah. seats and like just lost feeling.
I drive it.
They're designed to look at what the tables not
Yeah.
sit in.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that finds those to be miserable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They look really cool, but they hit you like mid cap.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Anybody doing anything cool?
I'm here.
I mean, yeah.
I'm actually.
Got shot.
I feel like every whole kind of. Not quite.
Just like exploded. I came prepared.
Unfortunately, I haven't been able to play around with Unreal too much. I've had a couple weeks, started a new job,
Gotcha.
new
Are we gonna be able to show projects at some point, or?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
Oh, yes.
awesome.
I was
Um,
looking up.
Yeah, in fact, would love it if you guys have,
Get invited back
yeah,
to
projects
my
you want.
professor.
I didn't have much last time, but we're working on something.
Yeah, if you do,
Show it.
just message me on Discord, and just let me know, and I'll make sure we block out some time, so. Would love to. And that's an open invitation. If you guys have projects or things you're working on that you want to show, of course, respect NDAs. but-
On you, that room does have Unreal and various other softwares on it. So.
Yeah, we can preload the project on this machine, we can, if you got a machine yourself, we can just plug you in, but we would absolutely love to showcase what you guys are working on.
I was really surprised.
So if I do have it right now, would it be easier? I have it on a drive here, but I also
We
have a
might be able to,
I
see if we can get through,
was also really happy.
if we can get through what we have now, maybe towards the end, I'll see if we can wrap it a little
really
early
weird.
and then.
No big deal. I mean, I just
I'm technically still a student,
didn't want to come in prepared.
but he's also like go around and give critique. I'm like, I'm not that good. I'm not good enough to go around and be like,
I
this
mean, also at the same time, you know, so but you don't know everyone.
Are you sitting here?
Yeah.
Oh, you want a comfy chair?
Hopefully, I didn't leave. Everybody's like,
Oh, I'd love to sit next to the pastor.
It was pretty cool though.
Yeah, very nice.
Unfortunately, I just hoping I got to be on the board to
those that do.
like grade you guys this semester. He's like, I don't want to like rock the boat in terms of like you're technically still a student grading other students.
Yeah, and also I guess the other concern is that you have connections.
Right. Not that I would let you get away with anything at all. If you brought something in, I was like, that's a C. I would give you a C.
Did I miss much? Is someone really late?
But
You went through the.
It was pretty
I don't
cool.
think you have to worry about the camera, but I.
No, I was telling the truth that like 95% of the people in that class, I don't have any worries for. I don't know if it was just my class that was a fluke, or if just all the like academies thought it was.
If you want to review our
half the class.
link on Friday.
Yeah.
Because no one knows what it is.
I don't know.
I think the way
Like,
you should
You guys really big twin.
I think
We're shooting right
you
now.
shouldn't let people do 4 short terms.
We've been getting.
That's
Right.
about it. I think
Unless
it's
it's like certain things, like I think concept art would be kind of cool if you did like 4 separate ones,
like for
but not.
modeling. I think certain things you shouldn't just allow to do.
Well, I think.
Because I know somebody's been doing short terms.
Almost tried it today, but there was a break in the.
Well, I like what you were saying about like make all the assets
Almost
the
tried
first first part of the semester and the second part of the semester and populate the area.
It's like, okay.
Because if you're still like trying to make an asset the week before,
A lot of people at the first set on the first
So
semester kind of
Zoom is like a
now we're
conferencing,
kind of
where
Right,
Twitch is
so-
more chit chat, but that's about
I've
it.
had lunches with, well, I've had lunch with Myers, I had a lunch with Garrison, yeah. He's,
Which is like
we had a long conversation about teaching science. I told him I wouldn't say anything about it, so I won't.
Yeah.
But as a former student, right? As like a former student in his class, I was like, he did good. He just needs to be updated because most of the classes are
For that live
the same for the last 10 years. And 10 years ago, just about everybody was graduating and going to the some studio. Right. And I like that Garrison understands like when he taught the what's it called? Digital sculpting. What's the other one that's like the same level as capstone? Career prep. That's what career prep is. And I'm glad that he realizes that that's not like his gifted area. Because when I took with him,
We all went to see the
we
new,
did nothing like
Avengers movie on Saturday.
projects that were just big enough
You're
to
gonna
take
go
some
really, it's been that crazy animation for my industrial at some point.
How you doing?
Skeleton. Good.
Staying busy?
Yeah, we could do that.
And you did that at the first meeting, and that was the only one I missed.
Yeah, I can see about
whole semester we made
see
stuff
that
for
doing something.
for the demo reel.
Probably have
It
one
was
like
projects.
one of our
Here's
animators
this like
shit.
engine.
That's
Put something out there on the.
I'm
You're an
friends
insane
with
person.
you know,
My
a lot
character
of
should be
why
very
I'm basically
like-
relying on building to explain. But I'm starting to hit a point where, you know,
I just
things
need a
I can
project.
readily imagine the
That's all
code
I
that
did. Is I
underlies
hit like
what's
a wall.
going on.
Just like
In the configuration
make
tools.
stuff for myself.
And so it starts to become more like
do-
programming, which
I
is
do these things for
familiar
payment.
to me.
But
The interesting part is that
But I can only do one character and everything else is like
drawing animation tools
so if you find someone to be able to do that.
you know, like the flat stuff.
I don't even know what the degree is called.
Okay, I found it.
The thing is, you start, you
Yeah.
see that stuff, and it's basically just
But
massive
then I'm coming back to the
visual assets.
I don't know what
Then
the
you start
programming one is here.
You've got code building.
But programming again basically is like what technical artist.
I understand the code part better than I do.
I made a game this last year and I sat in so many meetings and I was just like, this is all coding. I don't need to be here and doing work. And I didn't understand a single thing. They asked me like one single question at the end. But if I can interject and understand what the product is the entire time, like that would be a lot of help. And I can ask for more money. So that's always good. Sorry, what?
Do you think the course is here or
Yeah, especially because I had a lot of like FaceTime with like younger students that were
I
coming
posted
in,
it.
when I was working at Flipside,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
which is like a company that I worked for, which does like free-roam VR. Huge arenas, headset, walking around. And a lot of kids came in and were like, we're in high school or we're in middle school, we want to make games. We started coding, we started 3D modeling, like what do I need to do? I'm like, go to Johnson County, take classes there. It's cheaper than
I wonder
anything
if
you'll
you're,
find. And what teachers actually care about it.
you can program something, a different image.
Right,
into it.
you drop $300
That's the most important.
and you find
So
out
it has
if you
Coursera.
like 2D.
No, I got it.
Oh,
It's
of course,
just
yeah.
my thumb
Yeah.
was just.
But like your
Pop it
company
out, pop it out.
logo in there.
Away from the edges.
Scratch it off.
Just let's say
Anyway.
jump.
Well, some of them are
Just be
programmable,
blatantly honest.
so you can put it.
I like the little
And that's, I think, what they're transferring to a lot more is
Keeps track
I
of.
saw one
not
of
stringing
those.
people along, being like,
But
you've
yeah,
got
it's
D's in
easy.
every single
Yeah.
class. Technically, you can.
That falsely kind of. Oh, that's
But
cool.
you're never
All right,
gonna
cool.
get a job.
Yeah. On to the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, the thing
2
is, when
years
he
of
talks
your life,
about
basically.
a lot of the
and the
description
money.
of what's going on there,
But if
I mean,
it's,
there's a lot of similarities.
yeah,
in,
I mean, I've technically, well, now with the second degree, I will have like 3 different college paths. And one of them is still haunting me with student debt. Because I went to a state
You do
college.
have frosted glass
to
with
do-
your image, you know, blacked out with your image in the frosted glass so that way you can't actually
classes like $150. You get to see
Actually, it was
like that.
talking to my wife about it. If you can get they cover glass edges, so you basically just make the negative of it. And she's got a line with the negative of it, and then spray the glass on the edge.
Yeah, that's how you frost it.
That would be the next custom thing I do.
Well, you know, the thing is, at some point, you just have to pay basics.
Right, you did.
You can't sit what they're
Kind of like Castlevania, what Castlevania did. Are you looking to take classes or? Oh, okay. Sorry,
I wonder what the theme will be.
I've had a long day.
because you, yeah, you're basically,
The
you
theme
know,
for the game
and the thing, so you have to have some fun.
I think they posted it, actually.
There's 3 places.
It only came out on Thursday.
If you heard
The theme.
Or maybe they just posted it.
Right, you can stay here.
As
And there's a
opposed
couple
They got
of
the
lockers,
rules, they
but
got
there's
the, you know, you gotta sleep, you never call them.
not with a lot of people.
And the other
buying
thing is,
Windows
there's
B.
no,
Or you can move to either coast. That's very expensive, but
and you can say, well, without putting it on something.
By the way, your academy link is linked to the game too.
those competitions that they run,
In your slides. Yeah, the academy link on the second or third page.
yeah.
No.
But it's also like a friend that you're like,
Oh yeah. Whoops.
I will
We're gonna change that.
good job if I need to. But yes, Austin.
Alright, cool. We'll get started in about 2 minutes.
Like another place to look at, but it's really being taken over by Google. Yeah. So 2 years ago, that'd be a great place to go and get a small house or whatever. But now, you want like a itty bitty little house for like $2 million. So Dallas, it's a little bit more of a drive, but Houston's really good. Yeah.
Tools out there.
The main thing is just portfolio flow. And I said it
Probably better
today,
academy to unroll.
And you basically
I
have to say,
stress the importance of like doing stuff like this and not burning any bridges, because I've gotten 6 or 7 different contract jobs just by like branches that have been people recommended me for stuff, or I've gone to a thing and I've talked to somebody after, or
sometimes have some
I've just hunted down a
pays
couple
for
of my friends to do
strip
it.
off the code and say, okay, well,
Never
I'm
say
looking
no
a project
unless they're not willing to pay you.
but I need to
Even
go.
then, sometimes.
I need to get
Yeah.
some more sophisticated graphing.
Right.
All right, cool. You guys ready to go ahead and we'll start picking up with UMG stuff?
And so you gotta figure out, well,
Hopefully that answers your question.
how to get the data over there.
All right, cool. I think you should still be able to hear me.
Oh, that's cool. It looks good. I like it. Did you do all that?
No, I
Oh, okay. What is it, Mirror's Edge? No, Mirror's Edge. What's the, like, the title that was, the girl like Jones? Yeah.
All right, cool. So I guess first question out of the gate, just so I can gauge a little bit, how many of you guys have actually worked with UMG in creating menus and everything inside of Unreal? 1. All right. Okay, cool. That helps because I'll preface that UMG itself. Now, again, for those of you guys that know me, I come from an artist background, so I don't really consider myself a programmer. I'm a hack programmer. But I will tell you that UMG, in my opinion, is more of a programmer's art. And what I mean by that is it's not just necessarily a straightforward design tool. So it's not like drag and drop and then hook everything up. It was really built more from programmer's perspective. But the cool part about that is there's a lot of things you can do in terms of functionality and a lot of things you can do for broadcasting. So you can go deep, you can go really deep with UMG. That's not the purpose of this, so I'll try to kind of highlight the core basics of it. But if you need to, if you just search for UMG, just UE4 UMG and Google, Bing, whatever you want to use, this will pull up the UMG Designer's Guide. Now there is I want to say if you go up to the high level, there are some, so Designer's Quick Guide, so if you're coming from a design perspective, all the different things of how to create it, how to add one, I'll show you that here in a minute, down to some of the more advanced, let me see, widget blueprints, I think. But yeah, it'll take you through. The documentation is very, very good about highlighting all of the core stuff. So simple search for just UE4 UMG. We'll pull it up for you guys. So, okay, so to get started with your widget, you actually have to create the widget. It's not just something that is in the editor. So to do that, you can just simply right-click in your content folder, and you can create a user interface widget blueprint. Okay. Slate brush, slate widget style, and font. I'll show you. Some of those can be auto-created when you start dragging and dropping things in. But essentially, to get your widget, you just simply create this. We'll call it a new widget blueprint and open it. And there you go. That's it. So this gets you into the UMG editor. To highlight real quick kind of the core basics of this, and you'll see as we go along. Over in your palette, now again, all these you can undock, but I'm just going to leave it, I'll just leave it as default for now. Your palette contains all the various different, I don't want to say widgets because we're working in a widget, but essentially all the different little components that you can add to it. So you've got borders, buttons, checkboxes, images, sliders. If we go out through expanding kind of all these things, you'll see all the different things, combo boxes, blah, 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 all the way down. So that's really kind of the core of your tools. The other thing you can do is you can right-click in your hierarchy and you can wrap things. I want to say that you can, no, I think that's mostly where it is. So you can drag and drop these things in there. But that is the palette. So that contains your other stuff. I will tell you this. If you start with, and this is why I mentioned the documentation, if you think a border is what a border is, it's not what a border is. It's the best way to put it. So there are things you can do, and that's why I say reference the documentation, nug your way through it at the start, but eventually you get to it and you realize kind of what they all do. But a lot of what you'll be using for your UMGs are buttons. You'll also be using, in panels here, canvas panels, horizontal boxes, and vertical boxes. There's also things you can do with scroll boxes and size boxes. Those will be the general things you use a lot, and we'll kind of unpack it. And then finally, as you start adding things to it, so for example, come up here, I'll add a button here. You can see it falls underneath my hierarchy. Now you can drag and drop. So let's say that I add a button and whatever here, that you can stack these. So if you click and drag, do you see the little kind of arrows that pop up, down? That shows you in the stack where they're going to go. So if I move this up with the arrow up, it's actually going to go underneath what it's pointing to. If I go down, it's going to, well, see, this is probably a little difficult. See how it shows down? So we'll go below what is above it, and it goes right there. If I drag on top of something, you'll see that it actually starts nesting it. So we have a button inside of a button, which is obviously not what we want. But that's just to highlight the different hierarchy views. So you'll want to nest things in certain things. So because if I can take these, let's say I take these buttons, let me take them back out and put them underneath. I can select all of these, so all my buttons, and I can do wrap with, say for example, a horizontal box. And I zoom out. Now you can see my buttons are actually stacked side by side, a horizontal box. Make sense? Okay. Like I said, it's not necessarily intuitive. This is probably a very simple example. But this is essentially the workflow that you have with your UMG, is you'll be nesting things inside of other things and calling those out. we'll come back to animations because I'll show you where I had one set up, but you can animate all of these things. So you can have buttons fade in, you can have them do certain things. You can also do an animation on a separate widget as a standalone, and then basically paste that in as an instance to another widget. So widgets inside of widgets. We're not going to cover that in this series, but essentially where that comes in handy is if you want to kind of, you want to create a cool button animation or certain things, or maybe you've got multiple panels, it would make sense to nest that in its own widget and then bury those in and edit the instance. So. Like I said, we'll come back to animations, we'll come back to timelines. This is a different timeline. This is actually more of a true traditional animation timeline where we can set keys, we can go in, we can change movements, parameters, basically anything that we can target. So if you notice, I've actually got one of my buttons over here. Do you see that I know it's really small there, but it's kind of like a rotated 45-degree square with a little plus. That means you can add a key to it. So, we can target a bunch of different things: color, opacity, background color, vertical alignment, horizontal alignment, padding, transforms, individual transforms. So a lot of these things that we can, that you'll see later that we did in our actual setup. And then finally, over the details, we've also got these events that we can fire. This goes back to my statement about how UMG is really more of a programmer's tool. We can actually create these custom events. So, this is a button. When the button's pressed, what do I do? And all that will fall into your actual graph. So for example, if I jump back to my designer, and let's say that on this first button here, I do an on-clicked event. It'll add my new custom event, on-clicked, which in this case is button 193. Probably bad to do. If you go back, you can actually change it, and I'll show you real fast. So let's say this is home. I go back to my graph, you can see it changed. So this is actually very, very similar to the blueprints window. So you can see we can create custom variables, different macros, functions, and then of course our details panel on what we want to do. So very straightforward. That is the UMG editor. This is the heart and the soul of creating your custom menus, creating custom widgets. And again, this on an advanced level, you can have widgets inside of widgets inside of widgets and nest them all. But that is kind of the widget overview UMG editor. So with that, let's we'll actually dive into kind of how we set up our actual menu. So if I might actually go back and just play it real fast so we can kind of see. I know it was kind of quick to start, but if you noticed, it faded in, our background blurred, and it kind of darkened a little bit, and we've got our initial sets. Now, credits doesn't do anything. Quit will actually just quit out of the game. Very important. If you send this to somebody and they can't exit. And then play, if you notice, it does a little animation, and then these will fade in. And then also if I click one of these buttons, you notice they kind of cascade in, they fade in, and same thing with here. You also notice that when I click one of these buttons, you notice how the other one kind of delays and fades out. I'll share that as well. That's a cool little feature of doing the animation once, and then targeting the timeline, and playing it in reverse. So only do the work once. And then finally, if I click back to my menu, you notice everything fades out, and we fade back into the same one. Cool, okay. So how do we do it? So let me open, oh, not that one, the other one. So with this, I'll step through just a little bit of the hierarchy here. So there's a couple things to take note of. This black transition, this is I've custom named things, but if you ever wonder what is that actual component, what did I pull from? If you look up in the top here, that's where it'll tell you what the original component was. So this is a border. Again, doesn't make sense to me as an artist, but whatever. So with the border, what I've done here is I've actually set, on my brush color, it's just pure black. And really what this was to do is on our black background blur, so let me roll some of these up so we can kind of see it. This is where we have the component that allows us to fade out the background. That's actually a custom function that's built into there. But it wasn't giving me enough contrast between the background and what the menu was. So I went ahead and added in this border with a custom brush color. And all I'm simply doing is just setting the alpha. So I'll come back and I'll show you how we animated that in there. And then finally we've got our background blur, which this reads from bottom to top in order stack. So if you notice that if I had my background blur, say down here, well, it doesn't want to move. It would blur everything on top of it. So just know that's how it's going to read. And then finally, I've got this corner grad, which with UMG, you can have a mixture of text, a mixture of images, and you can also have a blending of various different solid colors and things like that. So our corner grad, I actually just created this in Photoshop. It can be whatever, but it's essentially this kind of darker area up in top that fades out. I'm sure there's a way you could probably program that. I didn't find it. So I just created just a simple little image and imported it, which let me make a note real fast, just so you guys understand when working with UMG. So I'm going to find this guy, which all this was is I simply just dragged an image into my hierarchy stack, and then underneath the brush, which will be rolled up, you can go into here and actually select your image that you want to use. Now, something to take note of. So all of the images that are in our content browser right now, those are the only true traditional images I've imported. Everything else was either done with text import or some other function. But with this corner grad and with all of them, when you import an image by default, it's going to come in as RGBA, and it's going to have compressions. Are you guys familiar with what MIP mapping is? Okay, cool, awesome. Well, that makes my life easier. So with that, when you load something by default, it's going to have those MIP maps. To get away with that, because you don't want MIP maps in a UMG, because it will assume the camera's far away and it will MIP it down. So all you have to simply do when you import the image is double click it and change the compression settings from the default to user interface. And what this will do is this will scrap all of the MIP mapping. It'll make sure that it stays at full resolution. Don't quote me on this one, but I want to say that when you do something with a user interface 2D, you don't have to be as concerned with power of 2 texture constraints. So for example, if you're authoring a texture, traditional texture, and let's say that you do a 512 by a 1024, the engine will process that as a 1024 by 1024. That's the amount of memory it takes up. But with user interfaces, it processes differently. It processes through another little sub-engine of that. So just make sure that whenever you're importing those images for your user interface, or you find that when you created a user interface it looks really blurry, change it to user interface 2D. So that's all I simply did by dragging this image into the canvas panel and then setting it to fill horizontally and fill vertically, and then set this image as my kind of corner grad. That's what that created. Cool. And then continuing down the stack here, I simply just created a new button, and I created a new text called play. Now, I'll back up real quick here and show you. So this is actually using a text element. So this isn't like an image. I didn't type this in Photoshop and import it. To add custom fonts, really all you have to do is find the actual text font face itself, which on Mac, on PC, basically wherever your fonts folder is, and you can drag that into here. And what it will do is it'll create this guy for you, so this font. The thing you may want to check is font cache type, runtime, or offline. What offline does is it pre-builds all of the characters, so it's not streaming, whereas in runtime, it's streaming those characters in. I've run into situations on past projects where a certain font that we used, when you went to go use it at runtime, it was missing characters. By simply changing to offline, it will say, hey, I'm just going to cache all the different things and set it. So that's one thing that you would want to set it on. And then finally, it's going to have the different font families. So just like a traditional font in like Word or whatever you use, it'll have those different variations. Additionally, with that, it's going to create this guy, which is the actual font face itself. And in there, you can do lazy load, stream, inline, default, yada yada, the different hinting. Those two things will be pretty much auto-created when you just drag the font in. And you really don't have to do anything else above that. And so with that, when I drag in, so for example, if I just drag, let's just say a new text here, I'll create this and we'll just say my cool text block. And then I set this guy to my font. Let's just say I'm going to crank this up 120. See how it's actually in on top of the background blur? Geez, good English. That's why it's not showing there. But if I move it, let's say just move it down here in this stack. So there's my awesome text right there. To change it, easiest way you can do it is if you've got your font selected, you can drag it into here on your font family, or you can click drop down and this is where it will change to our font face. So that's it. That's how you change fonts. That's something that is probably very common because Nobody likes Roboto. That looks UE4 very much. But that's simply all you have to do is just drag your text font in there and then go in and change it. And you'll have all of your same controls here where we can go in, we can change it, color opacity, so on and so forth. Pretty straightforward. And then there's, of course, justification, auto wrap text, and all that. So go ahead and delete this guy. And then really this was just a series of buttons that we had with the text element below them. If you notice when I click the button, that is actually the clickable area. The background color, the alpha is set to 0. So it's a transparent button. But that is that clickable area because really all I wanted was just the font itself. Now I won't go too deep into this because I think the documentation covers this pretty well. But in terms of like anchors, position, and stuff like that, I will make note of the position itself. So let me highlight these guys. So I want to say, did I change the text? No, it's the buttons themselves, but where they're dropped, all of them kind of have the same setup. They're just duplicated, and I simply just changed the text, and then of course change the name of the button. One thing to note is that with UMG, because there are programming features of this, you can't have a button called the same thing. So if you have button, 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 the engine will actually yell at you telling you you can't do that. So that's why I've used play _ button, credits _ button, quit. It doesn't really matter. Just understand that as you start stacking your hierarchies, you're going to have unique names for each one of them. And part of that comes that when we start creating these events, they're actually calling that name. So cool. And then finally, that pretty much I think covers. Yeah. So I nested this I think a little bit differently. But if you notice, I've got 2 canvas panels here. I've got a configurator and I've got our menu. And really what this is 2 menus packed into the same UMG widget. And what I'm using is using the animations and my designer, the actual graph itself, to hide and show these different menu systems. So I don't think, so if I hide this guy, so this is our other menu. So this is the first one, that's the one we just covered. But inside of our second one, we've got pretty much the same thing. Our paint buttons, camera button, animation button. And then what I've done as well for these the different color swatches, they're very, very simple. In fact, let me go over here, show you style. Those are just nested in horizontal boxes. And again, that's just to make sure they stay in line, and then I can add padding between them. But with my color button itself, this is where I've just taken those images. So if you remember from here, I had just some color swatches. Again, I just authored these in Photoshop, very, very simple, but this was just an easier way to indicate, our carbon fiber gray look versus our kind of green and yellow and whatnot. And so with the button, this is where I've added the same image. Now, here's something to note too. With the way buttons work, you've got 3 different states: a normal, hovered, and a press. You can change those images for each one. Additionally, you've got different padding with these. So for example, when you press a button, you can offset it so it makes it look like it's actually being pressed, give a little bit more response to it. And then you can also change the color of it, so you can tint things, which is kind of cool. But that's really it. We've also got some of these fixed elements here. I think the P250 was an image. Yeah, that was an image. Oop. Don't want to do that. And then the cube was an image, I think, as well. And then we've also got our menu button up here. Yep, which has text menu. So very, very simple layout in terms of positioning elements and just putting them on screen. There's really nothing fancy with that. Really where we get fancy is in our animations and our graphs. So let me see real quick. I don't want to confuse you guys, but let me just double check here. Okay, yeah, so I'll start with this first. So if you remember what I said, that I basically have two canvases nested in this UMG widget. Now, I don't know why I had this here. I think I know what I did with, I'll come back to that, but I think I know why our one menu is nested underneath this border with the black background. I think that was because I wanted the main menu to actually be darker, and so this was the easiest way to do that. But by having these 2 menus here, if I go back to my graph, the very first thing that I do, this event construct here, is I'm running through a sequence. Now, we'll start with kind of the first thing that happens, which is this camera horizontal box which I believe is there. No, yeah, that guy. So the camera horizontal box, make sure it's hidden. The color horizontal box, make sure it's hidden. And then we've got this cast a configurator. But really where this comes in handy is that when we start it, what I want to do is I want to play this first animation. It's the splash menu animation. So let me jump over and just show you what that is. So with our animations, you can click add an animation and you can name it whatever you want. Same thing as we have with our names of our buttons and everything. We can target these within our actual graph, within our kind of sub blueprint here. So with my splash menu, what I've done, let me go ahead and just show the main menu, is I've added the different elements that we have up here. So let me roll these all up real quick so you can see. Now, you have to add these things in here, so you can drag and drop and add one of those in there. That's already added here. But that is how you target these different elements. So I've got our black background blur. I've got this black trans, which again is just more of the, it's a border, but it's really all it is just a dark, semi-transparent color. We've got our corner grad, which is that, that image that we had. I've got my quit button, my credits button, and my play button. So within each of these, so if I expand, actually let me do the background blur. As I said before too, when you click these things, you notice that you have these different keys. So what I've targeted here is just the blur strength. So if I scrub the animation, you can kind of see what's happening here. It's basically progressing, getting more blurry. So with this, on this key, if I select this guy, you can see we've got 0 here. And then I scrub to about 0.55 seconds. I click this little plus to add a new key. I could also come up here and change my blur strength and just add a key here, and we ramp it up to 6. That's it. Very, very basic. So just added a key on our blur strength. Same thing with our black trans. If you notice, we go from the alpha channel, here 0, to our full strength of 0.45. And that's it. So same thing with our buttons. I'll show you here. We went actually just a little bit more, a little bit fancier here, just to give a little bit of life to the actual button. But I've targeted our color and opacity, which I'm pretty much just doing the opacity, and I've also done our transform. If you don't see one of the elements that you want to target here, by clicking the plus track, this will show you kind of some of the things that you, oh, I'm sorry, I added it by the play button. These are all the things that you can actually key in there. So a bunch of different things you could do with it. But with it, you can see here on our transform, our translation, it's dropping a little bit. And then also on our color and opacity, we're simply changing just our opacity, just the alpha. Again, very straightforward, very, very simple. I think one thing to note from an aesthetic standpoint that I think is really important to consider with when you make menus and animation stuff, keep it simple. Very busy menus are actually quite ugly. In fact, I would say too, next time you play a game or something, just see how the menus work. You'll see they're very, very, very subtle. So that's what we kind of try to do with this. Plus we wanted this product configured to be, kind of elegant. So very, very simple, very, very smooth. So that's essentially what I've done with this splash menu animation. Is all of these things fit through this timeline. So ends at 1 second, and everything kind of comes in and out. One thing I do want to show you real fast, if you notice that on our transform, so if I kind of zoom in here, you'll notice that it comes in quickly, but then it takes a minute to kind of settle in. To do this, inside of the actual timeline itself, you've got the show animation keys in Curve Editor. And this will look very, very similar to what we're doing in the timeline. So with your keys, when you add them by default, you can go in and you can change any kind of these interpolations, but you can also select it. And in here, I will admit, I hope they fix this in later. Maybe there is a way to show like the different handles where you can do it. I haven't really found it yet. But in here, what I've done is, I want to say it's this guy. Let me just double check. Right here. So in your tangents, you can do this arrive tangent. So if I take this down to 0, where is it? Maybe it's my leave tangent. Anyways, basically what you can do is you can edit these different tangents and you can make it smoother. Again, this all translates back to very traditional animation, but that's essentially how I was able to get, if I go back in here, which by the way, if you just click that, it'll go back to your graph. That's how I was able to get that kind of smooth animation in. I didn't like the default because it just kind of went kunk, had weight when it hit. But that's how you go in and you customize the keys. Okay. Any questions on that so far, on the animation graph and all that one? Okay, cool. So yeah, so created this animation, and that's when, if I go back to our graph here, that's essentially what I'm doing right now. So when this widget is called, when it's constructed, what it does is it goes through and it plays this animation. What's cool about this, so if I right click and I just do play animation, that is this node. So you notice that I'll have to plug it in here, and then I can target the animation, or you can select it here. This is just easier just to add it. You'll notice that when we created that animation, I want to say it's, am I missing it? Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's nested in here. So simply drag that off, get splash, which is that splash animation, and plug it in as my animation. And then this was kind of cool. Like I said before, I'll show you guys later, but what's cool about this animation node itself is you can choose a start time, you can choose how many times it loops, but you've also got this play mode. Forward, reverse, and ping pong. So forward will go from 0 to whatever your end value is. Reverse will go from the end to the front. Ping pong will go from start to finish to back to start. So really cool. The reason why I want to highlight that is that as you're building these menus, it doesn't make sense to do an animation that goes forward and is the exact same animation in reverse. Just use this node and do the play mode in reverse. Okay, so that's our initialize. So we're hiding these two guys, and then we're just playing this initial animation. All right, and let me see. We'll go to this in a second because those are our camera buttons, color selections, menu system. I think this was, let me just double check. Switch menu. Okay, yeah, so this was the other component that we had set. So this is the start. So this is just our primary menu system. And in here, this is where I've just created these events. So if you remember in Designer, that when I would select one of these buttons and go down here, create an on-clicked event, it'll create this node for me. So quit button, on-clicked, play button, on-clicked, yada yada. So with this, when we click our quit button, I'm simply playing a sound cue. Now I don't think I have actual audio here, but that is the click, chunk, just gives you some kind of audible feedback. In fact, you'll see most of these have some kind of cue that sound. And then with that, we simply just have our quit game node. That's it. If you want to know how to make a quit button, that's it. It's pretty easy. On this one, when we click our play button or we click our menu button, let me do our play button. I'll show you what happens here. So we spawn our 2D sound, so we get that click initially. And then what we're going to do is we're going to play an animation, and that is that splash menu animation. But if you notice, we're playing in reverse. So when I click play, it's going to reverse everything out, fade it, because that's actually being controlled on our actual graph itself. And then this is another interesting thing here too. I'm adding in a delay node with a get in time of the splash animation. And what this is doing is it's actually scanning this animation timeline and finding out how long is this timeline. And by that, it's giving me a delay, so I can't press anything else on screen. So it will play through the whole menu. And then from that, after that is done, it'll set the visibility of our configurator, which is this guy here. So let me go ahead and wrap this up. So if you remember, we have our menu, which, play to the end, that's our menu. And then we have our configurator, which again is just a canvas panel with all of our other stuff in it. So once it's done playing that animation, it'll make sure the configurator is set to visible. It'll make sure that that other menu is hidden so it doesn't have accidental clicks and tracking everything. And then what it also does is, let me go back here real fast to our configurator menu. This is where our configurator menu just kind of fades in. Again, exact same principles that we had before with just, targeting our background color, our different boxes and stuff, and then just fading them in or giving them a little bit of life. And so it says, hey, go ahead and play that animation. Go ahead and play it forward. And just give me my input. Pretty simple, pretty easy to follow. Cool. Again, not very complex. I mean, that's the thing about blueprints, so it looks more confusing. But it's just simply, give me a sound, go ahead and play this animation in reverse so it goes away, and then play this one at the beginning, and then just make sure this stays hidden and make sure this is visible. And that's it. And same thing with our menu button. Pretty similar. All this is doing, there's a couple little hooks in here for our camera box and our color box selection. It's just making sure those are hidden. I had some issues with it where I would click it and they would stay visible. So this is just saying, hey, just make sure that those things are gone. Spawn a sound. Now in this case, I'm using a sequence with it. Setting my menu to visible. Go ahead and play my configure animation menu in reverse. Same thing, get an end time, delay it. Go ahead and set the visibility to hidden, and then go ahead and play my splash animation. So that's it. That is how we get the transition. When you click one, it looks like it goes through. When you click the other, it looks like it fades back. So relatively simple. Cool. Okay. So I think that covers pretty much just showing and hiding the menu system. Let me jump real fast to, again, I broke it in this level, and I apologize for that. But if you guys remember that one of the things that is on the actual menu itself, if I play this, is at the end of our camera button, we got this little camera icon which plays the sequence. I know I had covered before how we, kind of broadcasting and setting the camera position for everything else. But with this sequence one, if I jump back to, let me see, let me grab this guy, our widget configurator. This is that process. So the animation button, which is what I called it, I really should call it more like play sequence, will spawn a sound. We'll get all the actors into the actual level. We'll go through, and what we're doing here, oh, I'm sorry, actually, my bad. That is not the, I'm showing you guys the wrong one. That's this one. So if we click this guy, this is our animation button that plays through. So let me go ahead and stop it, and I'll select our bike real fast just to show you what's happening here. Click this guy, road bike. If we go back to our animation blueprint, that's where inside of here, what we have is we've actually set up, there's a couple things. There's the road bike frame, the front wheel, the back wheel, and then this animation that we have. So what we're doing with this guy is we're actually finding any of those bikes that are in the level that are of this type, the road bike anim, and then we're simply just saying, hey, here's the wheel rotation. I want you to go ahead and play an animation, but set these to hidden. And really what it's going to do is it's just going to play through the animation. Now there's no other logic in here that says if I click the button stop the animation. You could add that. This just simply plays and you can't stop it. So that's what this animation is. And then let me show you the last bit, which is, or where did I put it? Is the actual sequence itself. Maybe it's camera button. It's in here somewhere. Ah, there it is. Okay. So I was a little stupid on this one. I call it the camera 6, but it's the 6 button, which is really the cinematic. It's very similar to what we have with our other ones, but what we're doing is responding to sound. We're doing this dispatch. If you remember we were talking about that before, that we had to actually call in to be able to target. And then what we're doing here is we're, I want to say, yeah, so this is with the sequence. So the camera options anim, this hides the entire UI. So if I go back real quick, no, it's not there. But essentially what it's doing is we're hiding the UI, and then we're hiding the other elements, and then we're actually playing that sequence, which you can target, and we'll actually cover that next month. We'll do that. Okay, and then finally, the last thing that I want to show you guys is the actual, when we click our color buttons, because we need to broadcast from our UMG widget to our actual road bike itself. So that blueprint we had set up 2 months ago, I think, we need to actually tell it, hey, do this. So if you remember, I'll kind of start at the end and work backwards. We created variables on that blueprint, variable 1, variable 2, variable 3, the different variations, and inside of each of those, that's where we set our different colors, our different materials. Ringing a bell a little bit. So with that, what we're essentially doing here is we're taking our road bike logic group P that we had set, which is kind of our listener, and what we're doing is we're casting to it, and we're saying, hey, I'm giving you the event, variation 1 has been clicked. And then the road bike BP itself goes ahead and says, cool, hey, variation 1, you are this. Do that. And that's it. So this whole node setup here, we simply just duplicated for each of them. Color 2 button, color 3 button, and then we're just saying, hey, this is the different variations that I'm broadcasting to you. And that's how we set it up. Cool. I think that covers most. Oh, this is the last one. Again, bridging off of what, if you remember, inside of our camera setup, the actual level blueprint itself. If you remember, I said we had to actually create these dispatches. This is where that kind of comes full circle. So when you press that button, spawn the sound again, which is just the click sound, and then go ahead and just dispatch this to the actual camera itself. And from there, the actual dispatch itself inside the level blueprint, that's where it says, cool, hey, I know I've got the request coming in, and I need you to go do this. Cool. Really, the only last thing that I'll make a note of is, if you notice that our spawn 2D sound, every single one of these are pretty much the same node with the same sound. You could actually just kind of drag in the actual sound file itself and just link these all together. Hindsight, that would probably be a little bit better, because if the click sound itself was too harsh, or you need to make a change, rather than just changing, I don't know how many nodes are in there, you just change that one sound file and relink it. So, okay, so that covers pretty much the whole menu setup. Now, do you guys want me to cover anything else to go deeper on that, or questions about this whole setup, or how I got that all to work? I'll show you guys again real quick. So if we play, fades in, move down, I play reverse animation to move up, click these guys, they fan in, and click it again, they fan out. Animation, color changes, camera setups.
So the camera button, camera 6 button.
Yep.
Is that just meant to go between the various cameras, like from 1 to 2?
No. So let me see. Like I said, let me open up the other map. I want to say I probably deleted something.
That's fine.
I think if we do it here. Yeah, I think I broke something in the project, but what that guy did. Let me just open up the sequence itself.
Remember, it wrapped around the bike.
Yeah, in fact, actually, let me do this real fast, because I do have. If you guys bear with me for a second. Hopefully this will go on the right screen. There we go. This is just the package product, so it's just simply been built. Okay, so yeah, so if I go in here and click the camera, this is what we're actually covering next month. And really all this is just a cinematic sequence. So I've got one camera, this is the teaser for next week. I've got one camera, which is a cinematic camera, so that's what gives me my depth of field, my bloom. You pretty much got all your post-processing volume information on that camera. And what I've done with that is I've actually kind of created these really cool cinematic shots, and I've strung them together in this sequence. And I'm calling that sequence to play. Now what I'm doing as well is I can press it again and I'll break it.
Right.
Which is just a hard cut. But that's what this button is it's not doing, like, it's completely different from the setup we had with our, we press camera button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, moving the physical camera. This is a totally separate camera, it's a cinematic one, and it's actually just playing the sequence. So that's what that button does. Again, I broke it. I apologize.
Source controls for.
yeah.
I guess the only question I would have is this what most people use, or are there different plugins that you recommend, or should we just take a look at?
For like creating.
For like menus and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, there are other systems out there. I think though from the ones I've seen, now again I should preface I haven't really looked recently, but most of what I've seen out there still bridges off of UMG, but it's just got some like designer-friendly tools. There are some other. I know that in the marketplace there is an HTML5 widget creator, which if you come from like a traditional design background, like of actually creating websites, which I think is a little bit easier on designers, that does that. But I think again that still translates to UMG, although I haven't looked recently. I want to say that they were going to try to get a little bit more support for more artist-friendly UMG. 422 does have some updated stuff, but I should have looked that up before tonight. But I know there's some other stuff in there. But at the core, I would say learn UMG, just because it's, again, the reason why UMG exists is because of that coding functionality. So you can program more things other than just trying to move images and widgets and stuff like that.
It's the foundation that everything's built on.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I do want to say I know for certain that Epic is moving towards more artist-friendly UMG stuff, because I didn't load it on this one. If you really want to go deep, in fact, this is one of those this is one of those positions in the game industry that is very specific, like a UI designer. There's a pack in there called, why am I going blank on it? You'll see it, but it's basically like an ultimate AAA level menu that's in there, and it is deep. Like I would say you probably spend a whole week dissecting it, but it goes through nested widgets, using dynamic linkage, so you're pulling like in live feeds from like a website or something, and it's got all different kinds of animations, cool swirly stuff. So UMG can get really, really deep, really, really deep. Yeah.
Can you create buttons to increase the speed of the wheels?
Yeah. Because if you remember, so if I, of course I gotta force quit this. So if you remember, in the actual blueprint itself, which let me see, I don't have it open. Did our old one. So if I go into our graph, and I've got this play animation. So in here, I've got this wheel rotation. You could set in a couple more nodes. So I could have something like on-clicked animation button. I could have another button in there that's like called speed, and I could have it as a multiplier. I could have it as a fixed value. But I could target the same animation and then just increase its speed, its playback speed. I could reverse it or whatnot. So yeah, absolutely, you could go in there and adjust that animation.
So you don't have to recreate the node or anything?
No, that's one of the nice parts about UMG, and that it's using kind of this scripted blueprint style coding, is that you're essentially just calling a function to that, or you're broadcasting, say, hey, do this differently, which is really nice. Cool. What else? Any other questions?
I was gonna say, is there any other unique ways to like interact with the menu? Like there's click, obviously, or is there like drag, like sliders that you can use?
Yeah, I want to say, I know in terms of buttons. So if I open up one of these buttons here, these are kind of the events that you have by default: on clicked, on pressed, on released, on hovered, on unhovered. However, again, because we're using some scripted stuff, you can actually create your own custom events. So now we've got event dispatchers here, variables, functions. So you could script a lot of these kind of cool things. So you could do some swipe features. You could even do some crazy stuff. I'm trying to think of like a good example, but like you could make a menu just all kinds of weird. If you do certain things, you unlock it. Basically, a mini game in of itself. Make a menu with a mini game. Please don't do that, but
hidden menu somewhere.
Yeah. But that's what this is. So again, out of the box, buttons kind of they come built in with a lot of these different things, but there's nothing to say that you can't go in. Like I'm trying to think here. There's other different widgets that you can add, or different components you can put in there. But yeah, you absolutely could do some things like that. Cool. Any other questions?
Can
you add a marketplace?
Yeah. So with that, there are. I'm trying to think about. I know on some of these as well. Like for example, the text itself, you can make that dynamic. And what you can do inside of your graph is to say that hey, that text should be set to this input, and you can create custom linkages to whether it's I don't want to misquote it. The different technology that's interplaying with a particular store, it will pull that feed in and use those as text. Yes, I mean you think about it, Fortnite, right? God, I said Fortnite. God, I shouldn't have used that. But I'm using Fortnite as an example because we know it's Unreal. We know it uses UMG. But the skin store and stuff, right? They're setting those variables outside of the menu, and it's dynamically pulling all those variables in. So the name of something, the cost of it, whether or not the user has enough V-Bucks or whatever it is, it's pulling all that information in dynamically. Cool. Okay, so that was the crash course in camera setup and in the UMG setup. Hopefully I didn't drown you guys too much. Now you should be experts in creating menus. Not really.
Watched it a couple of times.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, that pretty much wraps it up. So you guys are free to stick around. We can talk if you guys want to. If you want me to show some more stuff, that pretty much will just conclude. That concludes tonight's presentation. Be sure to like, subscribe. No, don't do that. But no, this will be posted. I will get some screenshots of everything that we covered. I will post those in a link. It'll be available now. All of our documents, anything that we're publishing, is made publicly on our Google Drive, and I'll have all those links. And then, of course, as this is being recorded, I'll go ahead and upload it. It'll probably take me a few days to get it up, in case you guys want to watch it again. But that pretty much concludes it. So, thank you guys again for coming. I've got a post-survey link. I was lazy this week, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, join our Discord, and then if you guys have feedback and stuff, it'll be good. Cool. That's it.
So we can come back next month for you a menu.
Yeah, actually, I'd love that. If you guys have something you want to show, that'd be awesome. Yeah, in fact, actually, that would be. I don't know if I should put that pressure on you guys, but I would love it if you guys actually had something to bring, whether it's stills or something. That'd be awesome to just kind of see what everybody's working on.
I have characters already, not quite.
You what?
I have characters now. All right.
That's totally fine. It can be works in progress. That's yeah. There's no stipulation that you have to have a final product.
I have something right here I've been working on for like 2 weeks, and I probably have like another week or so of work on it. If we can show that.
Cool. Thanks everybody for tuning into the live stream. Indeed.